Welcome back to RPG PhD, the channel where we break down the theory behind the magic of tabletop role-playing. I'm Dr. Ben, and today we're diving into one of the oldest and boldest narrative frameworks in all of storytelling, the hero's journey, or the monomyth. But we're not stopping there, we're also exploring its shadowy twin, the Antimyth. From dragon-slaying quests in Dungeons and Dragons to doomed desperados in Mork Borey, we'll look at how both structures shape character arcs, campaign tone, and the emotional journeys we go on as players and GMs. So, grab your metaphorical sword or your grimy thief's tools and let's break it down. Tabletop role-playing games draw on many storytelling traditions, from classic hero epics to subversive dark tales. Two contrasting narrative frameworks often discussed are the monomyth, the classic hero's journey, and what we might call the antimyth, a rejection or inversion of the hero's journey. So let's explore what each of these frameworks means, how they appear in RPG systems, and how they influence game masters, player character arcs, and campaign design. We'll look at familiar heroic fantasy like Dungeons and Dragons through the lens of the monomyth, then contrast it with darker, more subversive RPGs such as Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, Blades in the Dark, and Mork Borey, that turn heroic tropes on their head. Throughout, we'll discuss how these story models affect player engagement and emotional resonance, and offer insight on using or subverting them to craft memorable campaigns. The monomyth, or hero's journey, is a narrative template identified by comparative mythologist Joseph Campbell. It describes a common pattern in myths and stories across cultures. A hero leaves their ordinary world, ventures into a realm of adventure and trials, wins a decisive victory, and returns home transformed. In other words, the hero grows through challenges and comes back wiser or stronger, often helping their community with what they gained. Christopher Vogler's refinements of Campbell's work made the hero's journey more accessible to modern storytellers. Vogler, a Hollywood story consultant, distilled the monomyth into a 12-stage outline that's been widely used in novels and films. These stages encapsulate the hero's progression from the familiar to the unknown and back again. A simplified list of Vogler's 12 stages works like this. Ordinary world, the hero's normal life before the adventure. The call to adventure, the hero is presented with a challenge or quest. Refusal of the call, the hero initially hesitates or resists the adventure. Meeting the mentor, a wise figure provides guidance or tools. Crossing the first threshold, the hero leaves the familiar world and enters the unknown. Tests allies and enemies. The hero faces trials, makes friends, and encounters foes in the new world. Approach to the inmost cave. The hero nears the central crisis of the adventure, often a dangerous location or an inner conflict. Ordeal, a major crisis or battle where the hero faces their greatest fear or enemy. Reward, the seizing of the sword, as it were. After overcoming the ordeal, the hero gains a reward, an object, knowledge, or victory. The road back. The hero begins the journey home, often facing pursuit or a resurgence of the threat. In Resurrection, the climax, where the hero faces a final test, often a showdown that affects their survival or the fate of the world. Return with the elixir. The hero returns to the ordinary world changed and carrying the elixir, literal or metaphorical, to benefit others. Not every story includes all of these stages, but this framework is a useful guide for constructing a satisfying heroic narrative. It emphasizes character growth, moral challenges, and the eventual triumph of the protagonist. While the monomyth has been a powerful tool for structuring stories, it's not without its critics. One major concern is that it can promote formulaic or reductive storytelling, where every narrative is expected to follow the same predictable beats. This one true story mindset can stifle creativity and limit the kinds of characters or cultures that feel valid in heroic fiction. Feminist and post-colonial scholars have also pointed out that Campbell's framework is heavily centered on Western, male-centric myths, often sidelining alternative narrative traditions or voices. In role-playing games, an over-reliance on the hero's journey can result in campaigns that feel railroaded or overly heroic, where moral ambiguity, systemic injustice, or collective storytelling take a backseat to individual triumph. Additionally, the monomyth often assumes a clear-cut path to growth and resolution, something that doesn't always resonate with player-driven emergent narratives. In traditional tabletop RPGs, especially high fantasy games like Dungeons & Dragons, the monomyth often underpins the structure of adventures and campaigns. Many RPG adventures essentially are heroes' journeys in which player characters start as ordinary or inexperienced folks and through trials and quests become true heroes. In fact, it's been observed that RPGs from D&D to Exalted use the monomyth as their central narrative. This means the default mode of play in these games aligns with the hero's journey template. The characters embark on dangerous adventures, vanquish villains, grow in power, and ideally return home as celebrated heroes. Game masters running heroic structured campaigns often consciously or unconsciously map their story arcs to the monomyth. For example, a D&D campaign might begin in an ordinary world, setting a peaceful village or humble origin for the PCs. There's usually a call to adventure, a quest, or a threat emerges that the characters must address, such as a village needing help or a looming evil. Early on, the party may encounter a mentor figure, perhaps a wise wizard or a veteran adventurer. You can think of Gandalf's role in Lord of the Rings, for example, who sets them on the path or gives them advice. This is meeting the mentor. Once the heroes accept the call and cross the threshold, they leave the safety of home and venture into dungeons, wildlands, or other realms of peril. During the campaign's middle, the players face tests and make allies and enemies. In D&D terms, this could be a series of dungeon crawls, battles with monsters, rival factions, and the forging of friendships with NPCs. These challenges correspond to Vogler's stages of tests, allies, enemies, and the approach to the inmost cave, nearing the heart of danger. For instance, leading up to a climactic dungeon, the inmost cave, the party might need to solve puzzles, defeat guardian enemies, or navigate political intrigue. Throughout these trials, the characters grow in experience, both narratively and via game mechanics like leveling up, which prepares them for greater challenges. Every good heroic campaign has its ordeal, the major crisis or boss battle, if you will. In a D&D game, this might be the showdown with the evil tyrant, the dragon, or the Lich King that has been the source of the conflict. This moment tests the party's limits. When they overcome the ordeal, they obtain a reward. In RPG terms, the reward could be a legendary treasure, a rescued ally, or an important revelation in the story. Often the reward isn't just gold or magic items, but also the knowledge that they have grown stronger or fulfilled a part of their destiny. After the climax, the heroes usually make the road back to safety, perhaps fleeing a crumbling villain's lair or racing to stop a final part of the villain's plan. In campaign terms, this is the sequence where loose ends are wrapped up. Finally comes the return with the elixir, or the resurrection plus return. The heroes return to their starting point or move on to a new safe haven, bringing with them the benefits of their journey. In a literal sense, they might bring back a cure to a plague or the head of the tyrant, but metaphorically they return changed and celebrated. Many D&D campaigns end with the characters hailed as heroes who have saved their kingdom or world, a classic return with boon ending. In monomyth-style play, individual PCs also undergo personal journeys. A player might design their character as a farmhand turned aspiring knight or an apprentice mage destined for greatness. Over the course of the game, that character can actually live out a hero's journey. For example, a timid cleric might initially refuse the call to adventure, needing encouragement to leave the temple, but after losing a mentor to the forces of evil and surviving numerous trials, they transform into a brave champion of their faith. The leveling system of D&D supports this narrative arc. Characters physically grow more powerful, gaining levels, abilities, and magic in parallel to their story growth. By the end, a once inexperienced party of adventurers can literally fight gods or save the world. This mechanical progression reinforces the monomyth feeling that the heroes have earned their place and returned changed. It can be a fulfilling payoff for players. They can look back at how their characters started versus who they've become. Campaign settings that facilitate the monomyth often have a clear distinction between the safe, ordinary world and the dangerous realms of adventure. For instance, in D&D's Forgotten Realms, a storyline might start in a tranquil town, ordinary world, before sending heroes into the Underdark, or a cursed castle, the Unknown Realm. Worlds are often designed with great evils that can be defeated or at least contained by a small group of determined heroes, which is crucial for this classic hero arc. There may be prophecies about chosen ones, pantheons of gods that bestow quests or blessings, and an expectation that good can ultimately triumph over evil. This doesn't mean everything is sunshine and roses. Heroes must struggle against genuine peril. But the world of a monomyth campaign generally allows for heroic victory. The presence of attainable boons, ancient swords, lost knowledge, alliance of kingdoms, etc., gives the heroes something to bring back to benefit others. Overall, these design elements ensure that heroic journeys are plausible and rewarding in the game world. Enter the Antimyth, dark and subversive narratives. While the monomyth is optimistic and cyclical, ordeals leading to growth and triumph, the anti-myth narrative framework does the opposite. It subverts, deconstructs, or outright rejects the traditional heroic arc. In an anti-myth story, the hero's journey might unravel or never take off at all. Instead of a bold champion on a path to glory, we get protagonists who are flawed, doomed, or morally gray, and whose stories may end in tragedy, irony, or open-ended ambiguity, rather than triumphant homecoming. In RPG terms, this is the realm of grimdark and subversive games, where hope is a lie and heroes don't exist, and if success, if it exists, is measured in survival or personal gain rather than noble victory. The anti-myth structure isn't as neatly codified as Campbell's hero's journey, but it deliberately inverts the monomyth beats. Where the hero's journey would have meaning and reward, the anti-myth might give us meaninglessness or a pyrrhic outcome. We call it anti-myth because these stories often act as a counter-myth, challenging the assumptions of heroic narratives. For example, a classic hero's tale assumes the world can be saved by the virtuous. An anti-myth tale might posit that the world is irredeemably corrupt, or that those who try to save it become villains or martyrs themselves. The anti-myth framework embraces moral ambiguity, failure, and cynicism as core elements, providing a stark contrast to the optimism of the monomyth. The anti-myth, while offering a powerful counter to traditional heroic narratives, brings its own set of challenges. When taken to extremes, its emphasis on bleakness, cynicism, and futility can risk alienating players or making campaigns emotionally exhausting. Some critics argue that the anti-myth can fall into a trap of edginess for its own sake, substituting meaningful complexity with shock value or relentless grimdark tone. In RPGs, this can lead to player disengagement if the game offers no sense of progress, hope, or meaningful choice, especially in systems where failure is constant and consequences are harsh. Moreover, without careful calibration, anti-myth narratives can undermine player agency by presenting a world so bleak that no action seems to matter, reducing player decisions to tragic inevitability. While the anti-myth can be deeply resonant, it requires a deft touch to balance despair with engagement and to ensure that emotional impact doesn't come at the cost of enjoyment. Several tabletop RPGs exemplify anti-myth storytelling by design. These games create settings and mechanics that intentionally avert the usual hero's journey arc. Instead of farmer turned hero, the player characters might start and end as scoundrels, anti-heroes, or desperate souls in a harsh world. So let's take a look at a few prominent examples. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. This game is famously described as grim and perilous. Set in a dystopian fantasy old world, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay characters are often ordinary folks, rat catchers, grave robbers, mercenaries, thrust into a cruel world of disease, corruption, and violence. Unlike D&D heroes who steadily become godlike, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay adventurers struggle to survive and might never rise far above their humble origins. The world is doom-laden, and victory is always uncertain. In fact, the game's tone implies that no one is truly safe from horror. Chaos cults infest society, monsters lurk everywhere, and even the use of magic slowly corrupts the user. Most victories in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay are small, local, and come at a cost. Perhaps the village is saved from cultists, but a beloved NPC mentor dies horribly, or the heroes survive a battle only to succumb to the plague afterward. This is the anti-myth ethos. Any temporary triumph is overshadowed by an even greater lurking darkness. Blades in the Dark. In this sleek modern RPG, players portray a crew of thieves and criminals in an industrial fantasy city. The premise itself declares there are no shiny paladins here. You're a crew of daring scoundrels seeking their fortunes on the haunted streets of an industrial fantasy city. Rather than aspiring to be virtuous heroes, Blades characters are motivated by greed, ambition, or survival. The structure of a Blades in the Dark campaign is more akin to a crime drama or organized crime saga than a hero's quest. Crews rise in the criminal underworld, making dangerous bargains and accumulating power, but also heat from the law and vengeful rivals. Each score, heist, or mission is an attempt to get ahead, but often entails collateral damage or tough moral choices. There is no promised elixir to bring back to the community. More likely, the character's successes make their city a darker place. For example, by toppling one crime boss only to become the new tyrants of the neighborhood. In Blades, even if you win, you might lose. Every character has a stress meter that, when overused, gives them lasting trauma. Too much trauma and a character retires, perhaps to a bleak fate like being lost to their vices or hunted by enemies. The game asks, what are you willing to do to get to the top? A question that assumes moral compromise. As a result, the classic heroic journey is inverted. Rather than resisting temptation and staying morally pure, Blades PCs often embrace the darkness to achieve their goals. The narrative arc might end with your crew rich and influential, but scarred or morally bankrupt. This is a victory, Blades style, an anti-myth outcome where personal achievement matters, not benevolent transformation of the world. Merc-Bori, perhaps one of the most extreme examples of anti-myth, is a self-described pitch-black apocalyptic fantasy RPG. Everything about this game screams subversion of heroic tropes. The world is literally ending, the sky is falling, terrible prophecies come true, and the best the players can do is loot some treasure or seek momentary redemption before the final doom. The tone is nihilistic, as the game openly tells you to leave hope behind, the world's cruel fate is sealed, and all your vain heroic efforts are destined to end in death and dismay. In Merc-Bori, trying to be a traditional hero is almost laughable because the universe is fundamentally uncaring and damned. Player characters are described as wretched bastards and survivors. They start with minimal equipment and absurdly low chances of survival. The rules are deadly and swingy. Combat can kill even a seasoned character with one bad roll. There's even a built-in countdown to apocalypse. The Game Master is instructed to roll on a table of world-ending omens each in-game day, and when enough ill omens have occurred, the world simply ends. This design means that campaigns are short and almost inevitably end in utter catastrophe. There is no return with the elixir. In Merc-Bori, there's nowhere safe to return to, and any elixir you thought you found is just as likely to crumble to dust. The anti-myth here is absolute, a direct refutation of the idea that if you try hard enough and are virtuous, you'll save the day. In Merc-Bori, even if you try, the day might still end in darkness, yet players find a thrilling freedom in this framework. If doom is certain, you might as well face it with style and ferocity, which can be a memorable experience of its own. Beyond these examples, many other RPGs embrace anti-myth or deconstruct the hero's journey. The World of Darkness games like Vampire the Masquerade or Changeling the Lost were early pioneers in subverting heroic conventions, focusing on personal horror and tragic themes. These games explicitly de-emphasized or twisted the monomyth. For instance, Changeling presents a seeming fairy tale heroism that builds in inevitable loss and tragedy, and Vampire casts the players as the monsters usually slain in heroic tales. Another example is Beast the Primordial, which completely rejects the validity of the traditional hero's story. In Beast, you play as primordial monsters, and the antagonists are literally heroes. Heroes who seek to hunt the player characters are portrayed as dangerous fanatics. All these games flip the script. Rather than celebrating a hero's journey, they question it or turn it upside down. While there isn't a single structured anti-myth formula as tidy as Vogler's 12 steps, certain patterns emerge in these subversive narratives. The protagonist is flawed or morally gray from the start, so not wide-eyed innocent. The call to adventure might be replaced by a call to survival, or a self-serving opportunity. In anti-myth games, characters are often compelled by necessity or greed, not noble destiny. Mentors are rare. Indeed, elders might be corrupt or mad themselves. If a mentor exists, they might betray the hero or be ineffective, undermining that trope. Trials and challenges certainly occur, but victories are Pyrrhic. Each success has serious consequences or costs attached: sanity, loss, betrayal, new enemies. Instead of a single great ordeal that leads to ultimate victory, the central crisis may lead to the hero's downfall or a realization of futility. For example, a Blades in the Dark crew's biggest score might also shatter their unity or attract overwhelming retaliation. In a horror game, defeating the big bad might reveal a greater cosmic horror that can't be defeated. No true return or elixir. Often the story ends with the characters permanently changed, but not in the redemptive way of the monomyth. They might be broken, corrupted, or at best, retired with a cynical view of the world. If there is an elixir, it might be just survival or a bittersweet personal achievement rather than a boon for all. In some cases, like Merc Bori, the only ending is death or apocalypse. Nobody gets to return. The anti-myth approach in RPGs creates worlds where heroism is futile or subverted. The journey might still happen, characters go through dangerous adventures, but the destination and meaning of that journey are very different from classical tales. These games provide a counter-mythical experience. They resonate not with the triumph of the human spirit, but with themes of fatalism, irony, or survival against overwhelming darkness. Narrative frameworks like monomyth and anti-myth don't just sit in the background. They actively influence how players experience the game, the choices they make, and the emotions evoked during play. So let's examine how heroic versus anti-heroic story models affect player engagement, player agency or choice, and emotional resonance in a tabletop RPG campaign. The hero's journey model often creates a sense of purpose and momentum that can deeply engage players. Being cast as heroes on a grand quest is empowering. Players know why their characters are fighting and see clear goals ahead. Rescue the prince, destroy the evil artifact, save the kingdom. This clarity of purpose can motivate players to invest in the story and their characters' growth. Moreover, the monomyth typically involves rising stakes and payoffs that keep players hooked. After each trial, they anticipate the next challenge, and after the ordeal, they look forward to the reward and resolution. Emotional highs are common in such games. Think of the triumph the table feels when the dragon is slain and the treasure is claimed, or the joyful return to that town that now hails the PCs as their saviors. These moments of catharsis, the overcoming the ordeal and returning victorious, are classic because they tap into a satisfaction of overcoming the odds and making a difference. Heroic arcs also tend to foster player optimism. Even when things go wrong, there's an expectation that clever play, bravery, and teamwork will win in the end. This can encourage players to take bold actions and persevere, enhancing engagement. In a darker anti-heroic game, engagement often comes from a different place. Players might be drawn in by the intrigue, suspense, and challenge of a world where nothing is guaranteed. The unpredictability of an anti-myth campaign, where even the heroes might die ignominiously or end up as villains, can keep players on the edge of their seats. Many players enjoy the moral complexity. They aren't just deciding how to win, but whether the fight is even worth it, or what compromises they're willing to make. This can make choices feel weighty. For instance, in a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay session, the group might debate whether to flee from a fight they can't win or to make a desperate stand, knowing that running away, and maybe an unheroic choice, might actually be the smart survival move. When players do succeed in anti-myth games, it often feels earned in a gritty way. I can't believe we survived that haunted mansion with just one limb lost. Some players find this very rewarding because the game didn't hand them victory. They scraped it out through strategy or luck. However, Engagement in grim games can be a double-edged sword. If the bleakness is unrelenting and players see no meaning in their actions, they might become detached or nihilistic themselves. A skilled game master usually tempers the darkness with small rays of light or humor, even if it's gallows humor, to keep players invested and prevent despair from turning into disengagement. The narrative model can subtly shape the kinds of choices players expect to have. In a monomyth-inspired campaign, player agency often lies in how to fulfill the heroic narrative, not whether to follow it. Typically, the players want their characters to be heroes, so even if the GM presents a refusal of the call moment, say an NPC begs for help and the party hesitates, the group usually opts to answer the call eventually, because pursuing the quest is the fun part. That said, within the heroic structure, there's still plenty of meaningful choice. Players decide their approach to challenges, fight or negotiate, how to undergo personal growth, which virtues to uphold or which flaws to overcome, and sometimes which quests to prioritize. A well-run heroic campaign doesn't feel like a railroad. Instead, it feels like a cooperative journey to greatness, with players steering the course of how the heroes get to the finale. In contrast, anti-myth games often present players with morally ambiguous or lose-lose choices. Agency is very much present. In fact, it can be heightened since the game won't force a noble path on you, but the choices might be more about survival or picking the lesser evil. For example, in Blades in the Dark, if a deal with a demon could eliminate a rival, but at the cost of your crew's souls, the game leaves that dark choice in the player's hands. There is no narrative safety net assuring that a right choice will save the day. This freedom can be exhilarating for players who like gray morality and strategic scheming. They feel their decisions truly shape how the story unfolds, and there is a real risk-reward analysis to every plan. On the other hand, it can also be stressful. Players might second-guess themselves, knowing any choice could lead to disaster or unintended consequences. In an anti-myth scenario, it's not uncommon for players to decide their characters will do something decidedly unheroic, betray an ally, abandon the town to the monsters, because that seems like the smart move in context. When players make such choices, it can lead to powerful moments of roleplay. Guilt, justification, or acceptance of being the bad guys can be explored. The key point is that choice in anti-myth games often tests players' ethics and priorities, whereas choice in monomyth games often tests their ingenuity and courage within a fundamentally moral framework. The feelings evoked by the two narrative models can be very different. A well-executed heroic campaign builds up to moments of emotional triumph and celebration. Players might literally cheer at the table when the villain is defeated or feel a warm glow during an epilogue describing how their characters are honored by the king. There's a sense of closure and catharsis. The evil is vanquished, balance restored, the heroes can rest. These moments resonate because they satisfy the player's emotional investment. They cared about the world or NPCs and saved them, or they fulfilled their character's personal goal, like avenging a mentor or reclaiming a throne. Even the struggles along the way, losing a comrade, a tough sacrifice, ultimately feed into a positive emotional payoff, making the journey feel worthwhile. Anti-myth campaigns by design aim for different emotional notes, often heavier, sometimes more complex or somber. Tragedy is a common feeling, a sense of loss, or the realization that the ending isn't happy. For example, a Call of Cthulhu, another classic anti-heroic horror RPG campaign, often ends with investigators either dead or insane after confronting cosmic horrors. The emotional impact is shock, horror, or a bleak acceptance rather than joy. In a Merc Bory one-shot, when everyone dies and the world ends, players are left with a sort of dark humor or nihilistic thrill. Wow, that was brutal. We never had a chance, did we? In Blades in the Dark, a campaign might conclude with a mixed victory where the crew leader achieves power but loses all of his friends, a mix of satisfaction and regret. These emotions can be just as powerful and memorable as heroic triumph, but they're not uplifting in the traditional sense. Instead, players might feel haunted or contemplative about what happened. Sometimes an anti-myth game delivers an ironic emotional payoff. Players set out expecting to be the heroes only to realize they become what they once fought, leading to a potent sense of irony or poignancy. It's worth noting that players' preferences vary. Some players deeply enjoy a tragic or dark ending because it feels poignant and earned, while others can feel disappointed or unsatisfied if there's no happy resolution. Therefore, understanding what the group finds emotionally resonant is crucial. A good game master will gauge their players. Some groups revel in grimdark fatalism and will find a TPK, a total party kill, in the final act to be a cool, memorable finale, whereas others might feel crushed if their beloved characters meet such fates without some ray of hope. There's no right or wrong emotional target, but the monomyth versus antimyth choice will set very different expectations for the emotional journey. Understanding monomyth and antimyth frameworks give game masters and game designers potent tools to shape their stories. By consciously using or subverting these models, they can craft campaigns with particular flavors and ensure the experience is memorable. Here's some insights and tips on applying these concepts. Choose the right framework for your story. First and foremost, as a game master or designer, decide what kind of experience you want to deliver. Do you envision players rising as epic heroes as in a monomyth, or navigating a harsh, uncaring world, as an antimyth? This choice will inform countless decisions, from the tone of your narration to the types of challenges you create. For example, if you want a heroic campaign, you might design villains that can be overcome and conflicts that have solutions, even if hard won. Conversely, for a subversive campaign, you might intentionally include some unsolvable dilemmas or antagonists that can't be simply killed to solve the problem, such as systematic corruption or a spreading curse with no cure. It's absolutely fine to blend elements of both. Many campaigns have moments of darkness and doubt before a heroic finale, or start heroically, then take a tragic turn. But being conscious of the dominant mode helps maintain consistency in the overall narrative arc. Session 0. Set expectations. Before diving in, communicate with your players about the campaign's intended tone and narrative style. If you plan on running a gritty anti-myth style game, let them know that this won't be a typical heroic adventure. Your characters might be scoundrels or survivors, and not every problem has a happy solution. Likewise, if you're doing a classic hero's journey, encourage players to create characters with heroic potential, or at least the willingness to become heroes. Aligning expectations prevents frustration. Players who sign up for Merc Bori expect lethal doom and dark humor. Players signing up for a hero's journey themed D&D campaign expect that their characters have a good chance to shine and do good. When everyone is on the same page, they can buy into the story model enthusiastically. This also invites players to contribute ideas that fit the model. Maybe a player in a heroic campaign introduces a personal quest of restoring their family honor, a very monomyth-friendly subplot. Using the monomyth consciously. To use the monomyth model in a campaign, a game master can outline their campaign arcs loosely around the hero's journey stages. This doesn't mean railroading players through a script, but rather planting opportunities for the classic beats to happen. For instance, a call to adventure. You make the initial adventure hook compelling and clear. Give the PCs a reason they personally care about the quest, their home village is in danger, or a mentor figure asks for help. Refusal and encouragement. If players are hesitant, have realistic consequences or additional incentives to nudge them. Maybe when they initially refuse the call, things get worse. The stakes escalate, forcing their hand, or an NPC provides an emotional appeal that hits home. Mentor and talisman. Introduce a helpful NPC or useful item early on. A friendly wizard giving them a map or a magical charm not only helps them in the adventure, but also symbolically acts like Campbell's supernatural aid. Threshold Guardian. Include a formidable early challenge that the party must overcome to truly enter the dangerous world, like the first boss fight or a treacherous mountain pass. Overcoming it signals the transition. Recurring themes. Weave in the hero's personal growth. You can play on each character's background to give them tests that relate to their flaws or goals. A dishonored knight might get a chance to regain honor or be tempted to betray his values. The ordeal. Plan a midpoint or session that is the toughest battle or crisis. Make it dramatic. Perhaps it's not just combat, it could be a moment of personal sacrifice or a loss that deeply affects the party, so it feels like an ordeal. Reward and road back after this big climax, allowing some breathing room. Give the heroes tangible rewards and narrative rewards. Allies congratulate them, maybe a love interest is saved, then present the final leg. Now you have the Sword of Light, but the Dark Lord knows you have it and is gathering his forces for a final confrontation at the mountain. This sets up the final act. Resurrection and return. In the finale, one last twist or challenge can simulate the resurrection. Perhaps the lead hero must face a personal demon or apparently dies and is miraculously saved. Common in literature. When the dust settles, describe not just that the villain is defeated, but how the world is better now. In epilogues, explicitly mention how each character is changed by their journey, or have the characters describe how they're changed, and what boon they bring back, even if it's just wisdom or a tale to tell their children. This closure ties it back to the monomyth structure and leaves players with a sense of accomplishment and legacy. By structuring this way, the campaign will have a satisfying flow, and even if players take unexpected routes to each milestone, which they will, the GM can adjust on the fly, knowing the story beats they'd like to hit. Importantly, remain flexible. If players solve a problem earlier than expected or befriend someone who was meant to be an enemy, roll with it. The monomyth is a guide, not a straitjacket. Players often create their own heroic moments that you don't plan, and those are golden. Using the anti-myth consciously. For a game master or designer, leaning into anti-myth, the approach is different. Instead of planning a cycle of triumph, you might plan a cycle of escalating consequences or moral tests. So here's some tips for implementing anti-myth elements. Establish the grim tone early. Right from the first session, convey that this world is not kind. Perhaps the PCs succeed in their first small mission, but something grim happens. They save a town from bandits, but an innocent dies in the crossfire, or the reward is far less than promised. This signals victories will be bittersweet. Subvert tropes. Introduce what seems like a classic hero's journey element, then twist it. Maybe a prophecy speaks of a chosen one, but it turns out to be a cruel joke or a manipulation by a villain. A mentor figure might be corrupt or betray the party, defying the expectation that the wise old mentor is good. By breaking these tropes, you reinforce the anti-heroic atmosphere. A word of caution. Make sure the players are okay with this kind of subversion. If a player really loves their mentor NPC, and that NPC turns out to be dark and horrible, it could upset them more than entertain. Balance subversion with respecting player investment. Emphasize player-driven goals. In anti-myth stories, often the institutional or world-saving goals are off the table. You're not going to overthrow the evil empire single-handedly in a Warhammer game. So, focus on the personal goals of player characters. Maybe a character just wants to get rich, or avenge a sibling, or secure a safe haven for a few refugees. These smaller-scale motivations work well in grim settings. The Game Master can build quests around these goals, which might succeed or fail based on player choices, giving a sense of agency even if the larger world remains dark. Allow failure and adapt. In a heroic game, if the party fails a key mission, the GM might be inclined to fudge things, or give them a chance to retry so the story can stay on track. In a gritty game, you can actually let failure happen and embrace it as part of the narrative. If the players fail to stop the cult ritual in time, maybe a demon is unleashed. Now the campaign shifts to dealing with that demon or just surviving its rampage. The story doesn't end, it just gets darker. Players will realize that outcomes depend on them and that the story can go in wildly different directions, not necessarily towards victory. This can be exciting and will make successes, when they come, feel truly earned. Moments of dark heroism. Even in anti-myth, characters can perform heroic acts. It's just that those acts might not save the world, but they can still provide emotional highs. A noble self-sacrifice in a hopeless situation can be incredibly poignant in a grim campaign. For instance, one PC might stay behind to delay an oncoming horror so the rest of the party can escape. That's a heroic beat. The resurrection stage in a way, but in an anti-myth fashion. That hero dies and there's no parade for them, just the quiet respect of their comrades, and maybe a folktale down the line. As a game master, include opportunities for these if a player feels inclined. They can be memorable moments that prevent the dark campaign from feeling like a nihilistic slog. Thematic consistency. Keep the themes of your anti-heroic story consistent. If the theme is power corrupts, then show that through various NPCs and maybe even through what happens to the PCs as they gain power. If the theme is survival at all costs, present situations where hard choices have to be made to survive. A consistent theme helps players understand the tone and engage with it intellectually, not just viscerally. Subverting one model with the other. For certain kinds of storytelling, you can play the two models against each other for surprise and depth. For example, a campaign could start as a typical monomyth. The party is on a grand quest, doing heroic things, and then midway things fall apart spectacularly. Perhaps the expected savior prophecy was a trap, and the world falls into darkness. The campaign then shifts into the heroes dealing with an apocalypse of sorts, an anti-myth second half. This kind of twist can be very memorable, but it requires careful setup so that players aren't completely disoriented or disheartened by the switch. Foreshadowing the possibility of failure or darker themes will help this. Conversely, an anti-myth campaign could have a surprising ray of hope at the end. Maybe against all odds, the ragtag anti-heroes do something truly selfless in the final session and it actually averts doom, a twist ending of earned heroism. This can be powerful because it defies the established tone, making a genuine heroic victory utterly unexpected, but in a good way. However, such a reversal should feel logical and deserved, not tacked on. Perhaps throughout the campaign the characters secretly held onto some scrap of nobility, and in the end they choose humanity over cynicism, achieving a bittersweet success. Game designers can bake the feel of monomyth or antimyth into the mechanics of a system. A heroic RPG monomyth aligned game might have steady character progression and recovery mechanics. For instance, D&D gives increasing power and hit points to characters and even offers resurrection magic to undo death. This fosters a sense that heroes can bounce back and eventually conquer anything. Adventure design in such games often assumes the party will win most fights, albeit possibly with some retries or clever tactics. A grim RPG, anti-myth aligned, might feature scarcity and permanent consequences. In Merc Bori, there's no easy healing or resurrection. If you lose an arm, it's gone. If you die, you roll a new character. Blades in the Dark has a trauma system. Each time you max out stress and take trauma, your character is a step closer to retirement, and they get a permanent character flaw. This means the longer you play, the more messed up your character becomes, a built-in tragedy arc. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay includes random critical hit tables where an injury can maim or handicap a character, and a corruption mechanic where exposure to dark magic or chaos can slowly turn a character into a monster. All these rules reinforce that in this game, actions have costs and the trajectory might not be upward. Designers also set the victory conditions implicitly. In a heroic game, there might be clear end goals like defeat the Dark Lord, and the system will be balanced to make that feasible at high levels. In a subversive game, the end game might be surviving as long as you can, or carving out a personal empire, like in Blades, rather than any final boss fight. By clarifying what campaigns tend to build towards, the system guides GMs and players into those narrative patterns naturally. Tone through text and art. The rulebooks themselves communicate narrative frameworks. For example, D&D's art often shows epic adventurers slaying monsters heroically, and its text talks about legends, honor, and great deeds. Merc Bori's book, by contrast, is filled with grotesque art and nihilistic one-liners. One of the rules says if you miraculously stop the apocalypse, it all begins anew, nullifying the victory. These elements prepare the group for the type of story they will tell. Designers should ensure every part of the game, fluff and crunch, align to the intended mythic or anti-mythic feel, or whatever feel it is that they're aiming for. Tabletop RPGs are a unique storytelling medium where players and game masters collaboratively bring narratives to life. The monomyth, or hero's journey, and the anti-myth represent two ends of a spectrum of narrative approaches. The monomyth offers a tried-and-true roadmap to heroic drama. It gives structure to campaigns and resonates with our love for tales and growth of triumph. The anti-myth provides a counter-narrative, one that can surprise and challenge, delivering experiences of hard-earned survival, irony, or cathartic tragedy in worlds where heroes are scarce. Neither approach is better universally. It depends on the kind of story you want to tell and the experience your players want. Some groups will always gravitate to slaying dragons and saving kingdoms, relishing that moment when they return home as legends. Others will remember with equal fondness the time their scoundrel gang nearly burned down half the city to strike a bargain with a demon, or when their last Merc Bori survivor laughed into the void as the world crumbled. What matters is that the campaign is memorable and meaningful to those who play it. By understanding the monomyth and anti-myth, game masters and designers can better tune the dials of story pacing and tone. You can deliver the satisfaction of a well-structured hero's arc, the proactive punch of a deconstructed saga, or something in between. In practice, many campaigns will blend elements of both. Perhaps the heroes succeed, but at a price. Or perhaps the world is cruel, but small acts of honor still shine. This blend is often where the most emotionally rich stories emerge, as it mirrors real life's mix of hope and hardship. In the end, whether your campaign is a mythic voyage or a descent into darkness, what makes it special is the journey you share at the table. By consciously playing with these narrative frameworks, you as a GM or designer become a myth maker yourself, either affirming the age-old tales or forging new ones that defy tradition. And when players years later reminisce about that campaign, the one where they became the true hero or where everything went wrong in the most fascinating way, you'll know that you succeeded in crafting a story worth telling. Whether your campaign follows the classic arc of the hero's journey or plunges head first into the chaos of an anti-myth, understanding these frameworks gives you the power to shape more intentional, emotionally resonant stories. Use them, twist them, subvert them. Just remember, the real magic happens at the table. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below about the wildest narrative arc you've ever played through. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.